and welcome to this episode of Fish for Fallen Light. My name is Dan Vera. This is the fifth episode of this semi-regular poetry podcast in which I speak to poet and writer friends about their favorite poems. I'm recording this from Washington, D.C. We are now in our, second month of lockdown. I should say part of the country is under its second month of lockdown. Parts of this country are talking about or in the process of reopening. In an effort to educate myself a little bit more, I've been reading Laura Spinney's wonderful history about the 1918 flu epidemic, also known as the Spanish flu, although that was a misnomer, as I learned from the book. Anyway, that was the most devastating pandemic that's ever occurred in human history, and it was also an influenza outbreak. And the book is fascinating for many reasons. I highly recommend it. Laura Spinney is the author. The book is titled Pale Rider. The book is fascinating because, of course, it talks about the many waves of that epidemic, and it not being over until it was over, and people trying to get over it before it was over. And we unfortunately, ridiculously seem to be repeating history. In 1918, they really didn't know what was going on. They didn't know what viruses were exactly. They couldn't see them until decades later when the electron microscope was invented. So they had an excuse for their stupidity, for their ignorance. We don't have that excuse. Anyway, that's all to say that it's a frustrating time. It's an infuriating time for some, and no other better time than now for poetry. Poetry's always on time. And this episode is a great example of it. I'm delighted to be joined by Marilyn Nelson, one of the rightfully celebrated poets of our time. Just a fantastic writer, an author of, I believe, 8 or 9 collections of poetry and numerous books for children. Frost medalist, Ruth Lilly Prize recipient, Chancellor of the American Academy of Poetry, you name it. Anyway, just a delightful person who delighted me by agreeing to come on to this little podcast and talk about a favorite poem of hers. The poem she chose was one that I was very familiar with, that you, if you are a deep contemporary poetry lover, are probably familiar with. But I was delighted that she chose this poem because thinking about it in the context of the current lockdown and the epidemic, the poem is timely, as most of the poems that people on this podcast have chosen are timely for one way or another. Anyway, I'm not going to get in the way of the poem, as I like to say. I'm just going to let us get on to Marilyn sharing that poem. Here goes. Hi, Marilyn.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on this podcast and sharing a favorite poem of yours.
Inviting me. Thank you.
Which poem did you want to share today?
I would like to share Martín Espada's poem Alabanza, Praise of Local 100.
Great. Do you want to read it?
Okay. This is Martín's poem in response to September 11th tragedy. Alabanza, in praise of Local 100. If you have never heard this poem, which I doubt, the word alabanza means praise.
Mm-hmm.
Alabanza in praise of Local 100 for the 43 members of hotel employees and restaurant employees, Local 100, working at the windows on the World Restaurant, who lost their lives in the attack on the World Trade Center. Alabanza, Praise the cook with a shaven head and a tattoo on his shoulder that said Oye. A blue-eyed Puerto Rican with people from Fajardo, the harbor of pirates centuries ago. Praise the lighthouse in Fajardo, candle glimmering white to worship the dark saint of the sea. Alabanza. Praise the cook's yellow pirate's cap worn in the name of Roberto Clemente, his plane that flamed into the ocean loaded with cans for Nicaragua, for all the mouths chewing the ash of earthquakes. Alabanza. Praise the kitchen radio, dial clicked even before the dial on the oven, so that music and Spanish rose before bread. Praise the bread. Alabanza. Praise Manhattan from 107 flights up, like Atlantis glimpsed through the windows of an ancient aquarium. Praise the great windows where immigrants from the kitchen could squint and almost see their world, hear the chant of nations. Ecuador, Mexico, República Dominicana, Haiti, Yemen, Ghana, Bangladesh. Alabanza. Praise the kitchen in the morning where the gas burned blue on every stove and exhaust fans fired their diminutive propellers. Hands cracked eggs with quick thumbs or sliced open cartons to build an altar of cans. Alabanza. Praise the busboy's music, the chime of his dishes and silverware in the tub. Alabanza. Praise the dish dog, the dishwasher who worked that morning because another dishwasher could not stop coughing, or because he needed overtime to pile the sacks of rice and beans for a family floating away on some Caribbean island plagued by frogs. Alabanza. Praise the waitress who heard the radio in the kitchen and sang to herself about a man gone. Alabanza. After the thunder wilder than thunder, after the shudder deep in the glass of the great windows, after the radio stopped singing like a tree full of terrified frogs, after night burst the dam of day and flooded the kitchen, for a time the stoves glowed in darkness like the lighthouse in Fajardo, like a soul. Soul, I say, even if the dead cannot tell us about the bristles of God's beard, because God has no face. Soul, I say, to name the smoke beings flung in constellations across the night sky of this city and cities to come. Alabanza, I say, even if God has no face. Alabanza. When the war began, from Manhattan and Kabul, two constellations of smoke rose and drifted to each other, mingling in icy air. And one said with an Afghan tongue, "Teach me to dance. We have no music here." And the other said with a Spanish tongue, "I will teach you. Music is all we have."
Oh,
Yeah, I think that's a truly great song, and a song. It is a song, isn't it?
it is. It
A
is.
poem that also offers some reconciliation with the tragedy that it faces. The two smokes joining the one to teach the other music, song. I think it's a great poem.
Yeah, it's a great poem, and I'm so glad you chose it because I mean I remembered it, and of course I can't think of it without hearing Martin's voice.
Yes.
You know, that amazing rolling voice of his, alabanza, and
Yeah.
it reminds me of prayers in church growing up too. I mean, it has that sort of almost is it antiphonal, you know, because repeated uh, or the shouting from the congregation. Um, but I'm also struck, you know, remembering that, you know, when this poem appeared after 9/11, one of the things that was remarkable about it was this. At least I remember it. It felt like um, it was it was like an untold story. You know, that it was part of the tragedy of 9/11. It's like
Yes.
the focus immediately went to, you know, bankers and I
Yeah.
mean the other people who, you know, were part of that tragedy, but here were people who aren't sort of on the pages, aren't on the and I couldn't help, you know, sort of thinking about that as you were reading it. Um, even the litanies of places and nationalities
Oh,
and
it
how you know,
covered.
we're sort of in that cycle again, you know.
Yes, these are the people we're all wanting to thank now.
Yes. Yes.
We're going to work and
Right.
sustaining us. They
Right.
they are the backbone of society, and we
Right.
write them off so easily. I had marked a couple of Martine's other poems which do something similar, just
Hmm.
showing us the lives of people we, for the most part, even progressives, I think,
Sure.
close our eyes to. We don't see them. Yeah. So, and that's the other reason I wanted to read the poem. That one that it faces something really frightening without any foreseeable outcome.
Hmm. Hmm.
Beginning of a war, and it offers some kind of deep hope, and also because it's showing us something that we are learning much more clearly at this in our history. We're learning to see each other much more clearly, I think. So,
I think the other beauty of the poem too is how perfectly it world builds. I mean, there is this sense, even I mean, the preface, of course, or the you know the epigraph kind of sets it, but without the epigraph, it seems like it builds this world with this kind of that somehow like the heart of that world is the blue flame, you know, sort of, you know, in the depths of the kitchen and everything sort of revolving around it. And I couldn't help but wonder in that line about towards the end of the poem, kind of when the blue flame goes out. And then the blue flame goes out, and then of course you have that powerful image of the two pillars of smoke. Just just really remarkable. Um, but so just this sense of sort of worlds within worlds. You know, the world of this kitchen, this restaurant, and then not the larger world, but just yeah, it makes things much more complex and at the same time separate but whole at the same time. It's kind of a both and. Yeah, yeah.
mm, mm, mm.
Well, thank you for sharing that, for reminding me of that poem.
Thank you for helping me think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for the opportunity to read it. Yeah.
Well, it's good seeing your face and hearing your voice.
Likewise.
And stay safe.
You too. Stay safe and be well. Be well.
Alrighty. Thanks, Marilyn.
Thank you, Dan.
Bye-bye. Well, that was just fantastic. I want to thank Marilyn Nelson again for coming on to the podcast and sharing that wonderful poem by Martín Espada, Alabanza. Again, a poem that many of you are familiar with. If you're not familiar with that poem, and even if you are, I have included a link to the place online at the Poetry Foundation website where you can read that poem. It's good to see it on the page or on the screen, as it were. It's just a remarkable poem, and as you just heard in our discussion, the ways that it brings up the other stories, or the more of the stories of what's going on, and how that applies to the times we're living in. Anyway, again, I'd like to thank Marilyn Nelson for coming on. Hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this podcast, please like on YouTube and Facebook, and subscribe so you can find out when another episode's going on. And most importantly, if you enjoy it, share it with your friends. They might enjoy it too. This podcast, I started this podcast right as the lockdown began, as a way of sort of creating something and sharing something, a little bit of light, a little bit of fallen light with people out there. So we all have favorite poems, and any favorite poems we can share with one another. It's good stuff. Anyway, what else? Let's see. Want to give a shout out to a really great online site and an app for your phones, regardless of whichever phones you have, called Radio Garden. It's a great app that allows you to hear radio, music, and informational broadcasts from around the globe. So if you're trying to get out of your bubble, I like opening it up and just giving the globe a spin and just choosing random dots and finding voices and music all around the globe. That's kind of kept me centered in my practice of late. Anyway, I'll end the way I end all these podcasts by reciting the poem that gave it its title, Fish for Fallen Light. It's from one of the last poems written by the great poet from Chile, Pablo Neruda. Neruda wrote this towards the end of his life. It was included in one of the 5 or 6, I think, posthumous published poems, books of poetry. He left these books on his desk after his death, and they were published after his death. And this is in a collection called Sea and the Bells, Mar y las Campanas, and it's untitled. And I will recite it in Spanish, and then it translated into English. Si cada día cae dentro de cada noche, existe un pozo donde la claridad está imprisionado. Tenemos que sentarnos a la orilla del pozo de la oscuridad y pescar por luz caída con paciencia. If each day falls inside each night, there exists a well where clarity lies imprisoned. We must sit at the rim of the well of darkness and fish for fallen light with patience. Take care, be well, take care of each other in whatever ways we can. See you later. You still here? Is anybody else around? Okay. The secret writing prompt is the letters B, N, P, S. The vowel is O. The color is yellow. The number is 9. Go to it.